Welcome to the Culture Drop Podcast, where we drop down below the surface. We take a deep dive into the culture of your favorite art, books, music, and films. I'm your host, Jed, and now on to the podcast. Today with my special guest, cultural critic and Clash expert, William Devitt. We're going to take a deep dive into the music of the Clash. This will be a multi-part series. Today is episode 1, which is an introduction and an overview of the impact of the Clash's music and image. All right, so I think a good place to start would be that we were talking earlier about that book that you're reading, about the Clash. You were talking about the Clash as people.
Which book you talking about?
The newest one.
Route 19 Revisited.
Is that the one you're reading right now?
Yeah.
And you were talking about how the Clash were singing about peace and love and using militaristic imagery. So what were they going for? Were they going for the peace and love, or were they going for the militarism, or trying to do a little bit of both, or what was the deal there?
Well, that's the author Marcus Gray's something that popped up a lot in his first book, Last Gang in Town. I never read the follow-up or the Last Gang in Town Revisited, whatever you call it. But he kept using that as in part of his criticism of the band. Obviously, the guy likes the band, but it just seems a little bit overplayed. Essentially, you're in show business. No matter how much the Clash want to deny it, or anybody, the Stones, or Sex Pistols, you're in show business. And so, it's an image thing. These are strong images. If you're dealing with topics about a police state or fascism in general, well, these images are going to come up, and even the clothing might come up.
The what company?
The clothing.
Yeah.
The combat rock tour with the military fatigues and all that.
Right.
It's an image thing, but it's performance art, and that's what they're going for. It's a performance art thing. Their whole existence as a band wasn't just a band, It was, and a lot of it was bullshit, but it was interesting bullshit, and it was our bullshit. So I can't think of anybody that I ever knew that was inspired negatively by the Clash, by the militaristic or violent imagery or lyrics, encouraged negatively. I never knew anybody like that. Maybe early on, in like 76, where there might have been skinheads or whatever.
That's right, they weren't a negative band. In a way, I can see those two things going hand in hand. It's like the militarism, they're like clothing their positive message in a militaristic garb just to make it more forceful, almost,
Sure, I wore fatigues, camouflage, for years. For one thing, they're cheap, very durable, very comfortable. But back in the day, when the Clash were actually around, it was a combination of fatigues and bowling shirts, like a rockabilly thing.
Right.
And high-top Converses and ponies, basketball shoes, because I was into basketball. And so it was, three cultures: the hip-hop culture, the punk rock culture, the rockabilly, the rockabilly revival culture, Stray Cats and all that.
Right. Although the hip-hop culture came in a few years later, would you agree? The Clash, that wasn't there in 76.
No, I'm talking about 80, 81, 82 for me. But people, occasionally say, why are you wearing those military trousers? Well, they're cheap. I don't have any money. They're very comfortable, very durable. Oh, and by the way, have you checked your headlines recently in the world? You know,
Right. Especially in England.
well, anywhere.
Right.
I mean, you know,
New York.
the arms race. You know,
Arms race, that's right, the Cold War.
The Cold War didn't really settle down till 85, 86. Well, arguably 89. It was scary times. You know.
Yeah. New York was considered one of the most dangerous places on the planet at that time.
Between
England was having the race
70s.
wars.
Yeah, their riots were nothing compared to America. They don't have guns over there.
Right.
Well, the police don't have guns either.
Right.
Or the riot police do.
Especially in the psychedelic times, right? When we were having our 68, America was going through a revolution. They were dressing up in Carnegie Street hippie clothes.
Yeah, it's rioting in the UK is a time-honored tradition.
Right.
I think I think you almost have to get like a license, from the city council, whereas in the United States it's a whole different thing. It's full on violence.
Well, this also leads to the discussion of whether the Clash sold out when they signed with a major record label. Because was this all pretense or were they authentic?
That's nonsense. You want to get paid. You want people to hear.
Exactly.
Unless you're very, very stupid and just
you want to get your message out there, you want a major label.
Yeah, and not only that, the music was absolutely first rate, even early on. Who is actually the most rock star of all of them, just due to his looks and his vibe. They wanted that.
And it's amazing from a musical ability point. I mean, it was clearly Mick and Topper were the professional level musicians. Joe got by on his attitude, and the same with Paul. And Paul didn't even know how to play when he started.
Yeah.
But he definitely grew into it. And he looked so cool.
Right. And that's one of the reasons why he was actually picked for the band. Originally, he was, tapped as to be a singer.
Paul?
Yeah. When Mick had his pre-Clash band, one of his pre-Clash bands, Tony James of Generation X, was the London Assets. Unfortunate title, band name. But they held auditions for everybody showed up, including Topper. Topper auditioned for London Assets. Didn't like it. They auditioned Paul as a singer.
They didn't like Topper? Or Topper
No,
didn't
Topper didn't like them.
Oh. So Topper auditioned and rejected them.
He wanted to make some money. Okay. So, he joined a soul band, and they toured the continent in a band called the IGs, which is they're ex-American GIs.
Oh,
they
really?
play military bases, R&B and shit. And of course, Topper told everybody, I played with the Temptations before the Clash. It's, bullshit. He played with, one of the guys.
Was in the IGs from the Temptations?
Yeah, he was briefly in the Temptations touring band. Not Motown, the Motown band. The London Assets, they actually brought Paul in, and Bernie Rhodes, was kind of setting this thing up. And he was like Malcolm McLaren in a lot of ways. They were buddies. In a lot of the ways.
And then, how did Bernie Rhodes meet the guys in the Clash?
Hanging out at...
They're still part of that scene.
Hanging out at Malcolm's shop. Sex, he was called then. And everybody, that's, where Malcolm met, the Sex Pistols. Like that.
It was all interconnected. I know there's that special song that starts off, Bernie Rhodes says, "Don't argue."
Well, he managed the special.
Oh, he did? Okay.
Yeah. Don't argue. Right.
But yet, very much a man behind the scenes. I mean, if you Google Bernie Rhodes, I know he had a website for a while, I don't know if he still has it, but he definitely kept a low radar for...
It's hilarious, his website. It's like it was made, in like 1980 1995 or something.
Right, I remember reading it like back in that day, and like he was so opinionated. I don't know if it still exists. But
I don't know. I think it does. I think it does.
Check it out.
Well, he's a nutcase. He's a head case.
But he's an ideas guy.
He's an ideas.
Entrepreneurs are.
Yeah, and apparently you can't get around the fact that he really did infuse Joe, who's coming from a straight up R&B scene. He loved Dylan. So he had. Joe was an ideas guy too, and Mick was coming from straight up rock and roll. Glam, proto pre-punk stuff, and Stooges, Dolls, like that. MC5.
Here's a question for you. Like a lot of people say, the Beatles, without Brian Epstein, kind of seeing their greatness and how they could be great, because he had a theatrical background. He knew they needed to wear suits and be packaged in a certain way. Without him, the Beatles never would have made it out of Liverpool. Do you think the Clash would have ever made it big without Bernie Rhodes to kind of shape the politics and so forth around the band?
I think it's like one of those you had to be there kind of things. I hate to say it because, there's also the dynamic of right place at the right time,
And those guys were driven. I mean, Mick had been in different bands. Joe had. All those guys.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Especially Joe. Joe had some very minor success with the 101ers. They released one single. They recorded a bunch of stuff in the studio, which wasn't released till later. Yeah, they were driven.
So Joe's in the 101ers. Mick and Paul were in the London SS. Is that how it kind of went before the Clash?
Paul wasn't in London SS. He auditioned. He sang Jonathan Richman and Modern Lovers' Roadrunner.
Right.
Didn't know any of the lyrics.
Right. He sang Radio 1 instead of Radio On.
Right. Yeah. So he couldn't sing, as we know. He never learned to sing. But he had the look and the attitude, so that's why Bernie wanted him. Mick wanted him.
Maybe the coolest looking guy in rock and roll. I don't know if it's top. Paul's look circa 79.
There's always Keith Richards and Johnny Thunders. Plenty of cool looking guys who are still alive in 79. Well, Keith is obviously still alive.
And Paul is still with us, we should say.
Yeah.
And both Paul and Mick have kind of evolved into very civil yet cool elder statesmen of rock and roll.
Yeah, they seem to have.
And they played together with the Gorillas and so forth, which is cool.
Yeah. See, interviews with them, they seem like really, really decent guys. And like Mick has this funny thing. I don't know if you notice this, but since the end of Big Audio Dynamite, well, we'll just say since 2000, so Carbon Silicon, the guy is always on the verge of cracking up.
I know.
He's just always
twinkle in his eye.
It's like he's trying to suppress laughing, which is at odds with the image of him as the prima donna, self-centered artiste, which supposedly is the reason he was fired from his own band. And Paul too, very thoughtful guys, but they don't seem like really any different than they were in 77. So except for I think in 77 they're a lot dumber and attitude, as the young people say. They're trying to project an attitude.
One of the things that always struck me about Mick's guitar playing is he was kind of a noodler, as we guitarists would say. Like he liked to go on kind of long, meandering, one note at a time solos, which is very different than the Keith Riffmeister type of approach.
that's where he's coming from. Is Keith Richards is. I don't know. Well, you're a guitar player, Jay. Not.
From the rhythm side, I could see that, but when he would solo, he would have a penchant for kind of rambling.
Depends on what you're talking about. What era? You talk about '78 and the Given Enough Rope album. To me, that's pure Mick Ronson. Yeah. With Keith Richards, little Mick Taylor with the heavy Les Paul sound and the single note soloing.
Yeah. I'm thinking of like a solo, like a pressure drop or something. It's just kind of one note at a time.
That's Johnny Thunders. I can sing the solo if you want.
That's Johnny Thunders playing on pressure drop.
No, that sounds like that's.
I know the solo.
There's nothing noodly about that. Nothing noodly or extended about that. That's just the intro. When the actual solo comes up, it's the same motif. Given Enough Rope gets a lot of stick. Too many guitar overdubs. Right. Long, drawn-out solos. Like long, drawn-out. We're talking like maybe the two songs that ended, the A side and the B side. Last Gang in Town on the A side and All the Young Punks on the B side. Yeah, there's a lot of lead guitar. I don't hear it as noodling. This is what I love about Mick Jones is that you can sing his leads. You can sing. They sing. They sound like
as you like George Harrison's and Beatles.
Good comparison.
Right.
Good comparison.
And
it's
they
not blues-based.
And it's not actually that kind of playing is not like Muso, Yngwie Malmsteen kind of bass. It's like a very carefully thought out. You think it beforehand, and then you play it on guitar. And you can. The difference is you can hum a Mick Jones or a George Harrison guitar solo
Or Mick Ronson.
Or Mick in your head, whereas you're not going to be able to hum like a Joe Satriani, probably because you're playing so fast.
But even that Satriani, Malmsteen, Steve Vai shit. Even that aside, just the British blues tradition.
Yeah.
Even a beautiful player like Mick Taylor. It's oftentimes it's the blues song or whatever, like the Midnight Rambler in 1973 or whatever, 17 minutes long. And it's a beautiful tone and beautiful. It's like it's a limited 1-4-5 12-bar thing he's doing over, and it's improvisational. When Mick got improvisational on the guitar. That was much later. That would be about the time Sandinista came out, and he discovered effects before that in the London Calling Tour.
Right.
The phase, the Roland Space Echo, and all that. And he didn't know how to use them. He didn't know how to use them live.
Right, so this toy box.
Yeah. He was still ungodly loud. The first time I saw him was in '79. I was 10 feet away from Mick's mic stand. It was ungodly loud.
When was that? London Calling?
June.
Or which one?
September 12th, 1979.
Okay.
St. Paul Civic Center.
And you had the effects at that time?
Yeah, and you can hear it on the boot. And it's very watery, watered down. But as he discovered more effects, particularly after Sandinista was released, the Bonds residency, Bonds nightclub in New York, he didn't know what he was doing. That was his way of improvising. He wasn't doing it.
So by the time he got to Sandinista, would you say he knew what he was doing, or still?
No. Okay. Live? Oh yeah. In the studio, absolutely. But live, no.
In the studio, he kind of did by that time.
Yeah. But that was his way of improvising. He was not doing his improvising was not British blues based single note leads.
It was not. You wouldn't say, because that's where I was going with my next question. You wouldn't say it was Mick Ronson blues bass that was informing Mick Jones' playing.
Early on it was. Up until '78.
Which is interesting because they were trying to disown, if you had asked them at that time, any kind of Elvis, Beatles, and the Rolling Stones.
I think Bowie got a pass, probably. He was always cool.
Yeah, Bowie was doing blues.
Well, early on, yeah. But if you're talking about the guitar playing and Mick's ability to improvise leads, he stopped with that whole single note thing. He just made noise, ungodly noise. The Sandinista kid. He could still play. He could play better than ever. That wasn't his focus. He was locked into whatever vibe they were into. They created their own music called Clash music.
Right.
And
because I didn't dig the single note stuff, but he did come up with so many original riffs. I mean, if we just look at the album of London Calling, that's one of the reasons. Besides the amazing production of Bill Price, the engineer who didn't get production credit, and Guy Stevens. But that was pretty much Bill Price for the production.
Yeah, it's Mick and Bill Price. Bill Price.
Guy Stevens was basically the chair thrower.
Yeah.
And the piano drink spiller.
Yeah, annoyed people.
Provocateur.
Yeah, early on he probably had some value,
but just think how many. Each song is different on London Calling. It's just chock full of riffs.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of that what you call single note lead playing. I mean, there is a little bit.
You see why I bring that up? It's just single note lead playing. Reminds me more of the Allman Brothers than like a tight undertones kind of punky track.
It depends on what you're talking about. You ever hear the song called "Simply for the Devil"? Single note lead. I mean, that's about as devastating, tone wise. As far as the actual structure.
That's true. That's very cutting.
It's very
That
cutting.
seems like it's aimed with a laser beam and a laser searing into your skin.
That's where Mick Jones is coming from. So if you're
so
saying...
you're saying there's very careful thought put in.
I think so.
He wasn't just playing the pentatonic scale,
he was not.
Kicking back like the Grateful Dead.
Name a song, any song. Start with the standard, that people, diss him for, which is Give Enough Rope. Okay, there's no leads on Safe European Home. English Civil War is next. So it's a devastating movie. And he pulled it, and he did it live too. Third song, Tommy Gun. No leads. You got the siren. It ain't single note lead. That's sound effects. Julie's in the drug squad. He's got
and basically, I mean, Joe Strummer aside, who is just kind of chink on his Telecaster, all the guitars of imports were pretty much Mick on all the Clash records.
Yeah,
I mean,
Joe was really.
You got to hand it. Mick was a musical genius. I think we can safely say.
Oh, for sure. Not just because I like the band. He really.
And I'm in no way dissing Mick. It's just something I'd noticed in his guitar playing. But I love, if you think of all the different Clash songs and how different each of them were, like the Beatles, they're always trying to come up with something new, something creative, and not try to copy themselves.
Well, albums, as far as albums go.
And songs.
Well, individual songs, and that didn't really start till London Calling. Or the Cost of Living EP.
So why would you demarcate it there? Would you say that on the first album and Give Enough Rope, there's some sameness there? Or?
No, they're very different albums. Very different sonically.
No, but I mean the songs within those first two albums. Are you saying
very different?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, especially that first album were recorded in different places, right? It's not all just one band in one studio.
What, the first album?
The first album.
David, it was recorded over 3 weekends in 3 weeks.
In the same place?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Studio One, CBS Studio One. Same place the Stooges recorded the Dropout. With Bowie producing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know.
Simon Humphries, the engineer. Mickey Foot, the sound man.
Who later played with the Clash, or was he just a producer?
No, he was just a sound man. He was the one-on-one of sound man.
But he continued through.
He just died recently too. Just
I know.
A couple of weeks ago.
Was he involved in all the Clash albums?
No, he was fired after the Clash City Rockers single, 45. because he sped it up a little bit
Okay.
for the 45, and they got pissed at that. And it's since been, the original speed on compilations, but they got mad at that. He was just trying to do them a favor, make it more exciting,
So the Clash didn't like that, or Bernie didn't like that.
Somebody didn't like
But then he came back, what, at Sandinista?
No.
Or he never came back?
No. Mickey Foot?
Yeah.
No.
His name just looms so large to me in the Clash mythology. I don't know why.
Well, he's credited with producing their debut album,
Well, that's
which
why.
a lot of people think is their finest work,
Yeah.
Including Mick Jones.
What do you
Mick
think?
Jones says it's his
Do you agree?
favorite. No. I love Terry Chimes drumming, but it's not. It sounds like a completely different band, the debut.
That's right, because they had Terry Chimes on what percent of the songs on the first album? Is Topper on that album at all?
No,
Oh, he's not.
it's completely Terry.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
How do you rate him as a drummer?
Who?
Terry Chimes.
I think it's very good. It's very identifiable, very limited. Not limited as in being good, but a very distinct style. He played with the Heartbreakers, Johnny Thunders, briefly in '79, and it's like, and he was all wrong for him.
He played with Terry Chimes played with the Heartbreakers?
Yeah, for a few gigs. And there was
In England,
In England.
when they were touring,
Yeah, since '77.
which had a huge impact on so many bands.
Yeah, Jerry Nolan had quit the band and gone back to New York over the mix of their debut album, LAMF, which is a whole fiasco. That's a whole other can of worms.
Right.
But it sounds like you can tell immediately that's Terry Chimes. Terry played with.
Can you characterize what that is?
It's very clipped, very curt, very a very staccato sound.
It's not like chilled out behind the beat.
No, it isn't. But then neither is Topper. I mean, they're not.
No, but
Charlie
Topper
Watts,
has, because Topper is like so loose but controlled. Like, he's got a certain swing to it that Terry probably didn't have.
Well, that's the one he's talking about,
I mean, I'm just speaking as a non-drummer. I feel more of a musicality and more of a control and more of a looseness in Topper's drumming.
Oh, for sure. He's far more expansive and Terry would and has admitted this, in recent years, a far more versatile drummer.
Yeah.
I mean, Terry played with Black Sabbath briefly in the mid-'80s,
Yeah.
He was a road warrior. He was a mercenary drummer. He's very good at what he did. He's very limited.
Yeah, I mean, and kudos for him. I mean, we can hear the recording of him at the end of the Clash, opening for the Who in Shea Stadium. Sounds pretty good to me.
Sounds pretty good to me.
I don't know how much he rehearsed at the Clash before he just stepped in.
1 week.
I mean, that's...
One week before the first show.
It's finally a huge crowd being recorded. We can hear it today. And he pretty much nailed it.
He was very good at the beginning of that tour. I saw him on one of the first shows in St. Paul.
Yeah, and he
in
was still
August
good.
of '82. And it's, as far as bootlegs go, it's considered possibly the best Terry show from the Combat Rock tour.
They played St. Paul Civic Center?
Yeah, August.
That's considered their best show of that tour.
Yeah, that was one of the first shows of the Combat Rock tour.
Okay. And how long had it been since Topper got the boot?
February of '82.
And this was what? When did you see him?
August of '82. The tour started in
And when did Combat Rock come out?
May of '82.
Okay.
May, I think.
It was a tragedy because Topper's on the cover there in Thailand at the railroad tracks, and he'd been booted out by the time the album came out.
He said, to this day, he said he probably deserved it.
It was just too bad that they couldn't take a break or send him to rehab because he was so beloved and
The whole
so
band,
talented.
The whole band should have taken.
And it was a band chemistry thing, like the Beatles. Like, the Beatles could never have kicked out Ringo because it was those four guys created a special chemistry.
Definitely. I mean, and that's what they were
As
about.
history proved.
Right. And that's the vibe they were coming from was band. It's like Steve Van Zandt, has said, there are musicians and still artists. It's like, and then there's band guys. I'm a band guy.
But
in the Clash, you're definitely about that gang mentality.
Yeah, and Topper, unlike Ringo, Topper was like a studio, like session guy level type of talent. But not only that, he wrote the piano riff to Rock the Casbah.
He wrote the whole song.
What?
He wrote
the whole demo of it. He sang it.
He played the whole thing except for the guitar.
Yeah, so he was a totally musical guy.
Oh yeah.
And that is a weird song. I mean, yeah, like this punk, quote unquote punk band, even though it evolved, basically had this like barrel house piano driving a tune. And it's like, what the hell?
Well, it's not really barrel house. What gets me about the piano on Rock the Casbah, it's very, very light, right hand.
I don't know what
It's jazzy.
Is it jazzy? I don't know how you describe it. It's not. Yeah, it's not barrel house.
But
it's not. It's not post-punk. That's for sure.
No, it isn't.
That's part of what makes the Clash so great. That you're confident enough. Any band, you record something weird like the Beatles did Revolution that sounded totally distorted, and you have to be able to hear like people are gonna think this is totally like too distorted, or on the case of the Clash, Rock the Casbah, people are going to be like, what the hell? And you have to be able to have the foresight to think, you know what, this is going to make sense. People are going to get this eventually.
Or not.
But this is where we're at. That's right. We're standing behind this.
We're playing for ourselves, but we also want to be top of the pops.
Right. But you get what I mean? I mean,
for sure.
If you hear Rock the Casbah in a vacuum, it's like, what the hell is this? This is not a typical, it's a piano-driven jazz.
Well, you could say that one of their biggest hits, there are three, at least in the U.S., were Rock the Casbah, Train in Vain, and Should I Stay or Should I Go?
Right.
So, Train in Vain...
Two of which are sung by Mick, who's not the traditional lead singer.
Right, and, Train in Vain and Should I Stay, Should I Go are, standard boy, girl, rock and roll, subject matter. Those are not indicative of, where the Clash, thematically we're coming from.
Right.
Boy, girl.
It's kind of ironic, yeah.
Very ironic. And even musically. I mean,
what's the story about Should I Stay or Should I Go, why it didn't get listed on the album?
It did. You're thinking
Train in Vain.
Train in Vain.
Yeah, sorry, Train in Vain. On London Calling.
The 18 songs are already done. The artwork was done for the album.
Did someone just write it at the last minute, or?
No, Mick wrote it, and they were going to give it out as a
flexi disc or something?
Flexi disc in the NME.
That's right.
New Musical Express. And that fell through, and they literally the last moment said, tag it onto the album. And that's where it came from.
Thanks for listening to the Culture Drop Podcast. My name is Jed. I've been speaking today with my special guest, William Devitt, who is a cultural critic and a resident Clash expert. Today was our first podcast and also the first in this series. We're going to continue next time. Please join us when we dig into the Clash's early records.